Welcome to the second of our 7 learning workshops of the 2021 ERG Power Talk Virtual Academy. Our topic today is healthy leadership, and I'm sure many of you have taken extensive management and leadership training on topics like presentation skills, project management skills, and people management skills. And all of these are great to have, but according to recent studies, they're not enough to make us good leaders. Our workshop discussion guide today, Bob Rosen, has made it his life's work to study those invisible ingredients that serve as the foundation under all those other skills that we just talked about to make you successful. Bob is a trusted CEO advisor and a New York Times bestselling author. And in this workshop, he's going to introduce you to the key emotional and mental states of being that, coupled with those skills, will turn you into a powerful, successful, and happy leader. Bob, the floor is yours.
Thanks. What do you notice about these two zebras? One in the background is a zebra that we've always known and loved. And this is a new kind of zebra that has evolved and emerged in Africa. And one of the things that I want to talk about is that there is no return to normal in the current environment. In fact, there is no new normal. And the point that I'd like to make is that this is the no normal, and that's okay. And that we're entering a period where we're starting to recognize that uncertainty is reality and stability is an illusion. And so you say, why do people reach for stability? Generally because they're trying to manage their anxiety of the difficulty of accepting the reality that there is uncertainty in the world all the time, and we were always vulnerable. So that's why we actually introduced the no normal. So first question that I'd like to ask you all is, and you can just put your answers in the chat, which is, what is the level of uncertainty? And in fact, we have people to talk, so you could just talk yourselves in terms of and just let go of your mute, in terms of what is the level of uncertainty and disruption in your life and work? What score would you give? We could just have a couple people weigh in.
So just to underline what Bob just said, go ahead and use the chat function to respond to that question of what level of uncertainty and disruption you have in your life and in your work. And if you're in a place where you can or prefer to just turn on your audio, then do that. Click on the unmute and just shout out your response.
A 4 and a 2. And that basically 3. So that basically describes where most people are. There's a group of people who are deeply excited and energized by uncertainty and disruption. They love change. And there's a group of people who are on the other end of the spectrum. So there are individual differences here. But the reality is that it seems in this post-pandemic era, and it's really a pandemic era, that there's clearly more uncertainty and disruption going on, not only in our lives, but in our workplaces. So one of the things that we're finding is that the slow, unaware companies will fail. They will just not embrace the uncertainty and the possibilities associated with success and growth, and that the faster, insightful companies will prosper, and that these two groups of companies will show their faces more and more as we enter this period of no normal. So the question is for you is, how do you and your organization survive and thrive in a world that is uncertain and by definition disruptive? As I go into companies to work inside these businesses, I typically find that their business models are all in transformation. They're all changing, giving the reality of speed, uncertainty, complexity, the introduction of new technologies, the socialization and partisanship issues in society, as well as globalization and competition. So the question is, how do you survive and thrive? So one of the things I do is I work with CEOs as well as other leaders, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And what we find is they're grappling with a whole set of challenges, from the disruptions of technology to frustration about pushing their transformations forward, the lack of change readiness among their workforce. Customers have become more entitled and more demanding with Amazon and others that have taught them about what to expect. At the same time, we're finding that employee survey scores are actually going down right now. And I'll talk about that, why that is the case. CEOs and executive teams are very frustrated with the gaps in their leadership and talent pipelines. And then there's more stress and burnout and more underperformance and execution problems. In the last year, we have focused on four real issues coming into this period. The first is a growing recognition of the importance of health and well-being. And side by side to that is the recognition that companies and people inside companies have to develop a stronger agility and resilience in the face of change. You're all familiar with all the trends and the actions that are taking place in the DEI space. And then this whole issue of remote working. Now, what this has done, and this is really important, is that it has fundamentally changed the new human deal between employers and employees. And organizations are faced now to deliver a new human deal. And what I mean by that is that organizations must focus on the whole person, not parts of that person. And we're recognizing that some of our wellness and well-being models are bringing a much more holistic look at human beings. People also want to be valued for their diverse life experiences, not just at work, but at home and in play. They also are more interested, or as interested, in not what just people think, but also how people feel. And they want to be able to talk about their very unique and distinctive aspirations. On the flip side, our employee population has to become more aware of themselves and others. They have to become more agile, and they have to show up as emotionally mature and committed adults, because accountability is becoming more and more of an issue as we introduce more virtual and hybrid working. Now, here's the problem. There's a talent gap. There's a gap between what leaders need and what leaders have in terms of the talent requirements to meet the business requirements. There's also a perception gap. 83% of CEOs want employees to return in person all the time, but only 10% of employees want to come into the workplace full time. And so we've got a perception gap that's going to take some time to work through as we really address the issues of trust and accountability. And then lastly is the experience gap. Only 31% of employees say their organizations offer them this unique experience that matches their needs. So there is bubbling up across organizations, and this is happening around the world, a new human deal. Now, what that has done is that it has put a spotlight on the fact that the world needs healthy leaders, and we need them now more than ever. We also know from research that healthy leaders are more successful in life and business. So at the Healthy Leader, we're in the business of helping organizations change. And we believe that change happens one person, one leader at a time. So we believe in a set of principles that I'd like to just pass over quickly. The first one we talked about around uncertainty is reality and stability is an illusion. The second one is the requirement that people show up as more evolved people. If you look at genetics and psychological histories of the human being, we have become increasingly evolved over time. The other notion is that leadership is not a status, it's a process, it's a relationship, and that everybody has the capacity to lead with untapped potential. The question is, how do you show up? Do you show up with a scarcity mindset or an abundance mindset? Because we believe that this abundance mindset is the bedrock of possibility. We're also learning that leadership and well-being are holistic and interdependent, and that everybody is on their personal journey of discovery. But what has changed is the paradigm. We used to believe that what you do defines who you are. But in the last 10 years, we have flipped that paradigm on its head and said, who I am as a human being drives what I do. And it's critical for me to know, be, and love myself. And that is the key to performance and fulfillment. So, the healthy leader is organized around 5 centers of excellence. And we're just going to talk about the first 2 today, which is about how you can become healthy and grounded and healthy and conscious. And the other 3 programs we'll touch on, but it's mostly going to focus on those first 2. Any questions up to this point in time?
Folks, if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and basically present your question. Or if you are somewhere where you cannot unmute yourself, maybe it's a little noisier, or you prefer not to, just feel free to type it out in chat. Bob, if you're busy looking at the slides, if I see a question, I will then jump in and become that person's voice. So feel free to write something. You could send it directly to me only, or you could send it to the group.
Sounds good, because to make this a workshop, we got to get you involved, and I welcome your thoughts on any of these things.
Bob and Joseph, I actually do have a question. This is Jen McMillian. How are both of you?
Good.
Hi.
So my question for you, Bob, you brought up a great point there, and you talked about CEOs, because I know we're experiencing it within our own company, within the company that I work for as well. And you're saying about CEOs wanting employees back into the office 100% of the time. You've got 10% of the workforce that really wants to be there 100%. The rest is looking for that flex. And what was interesting to me was you made a comment there about building up the trust. And I think what's so challenging, and someone said this to me the other day, so this isn't an original thought, but it's something I wanted to get your perspective on. A year ago, when we entered into this pandemic and it became critical that people worked from home, there was this blind trust that we were going to get the job done. And it's considered a critical need to keep the business afloat, that everyone continue to work from home. Now, all of a sudden, as we've opened things back up and we're starting to go back to a pre-pandemic mindset, if you will, all of a sudden, companies are taking on this approach again of it's this benefit and a privilege to be able to work from home, whereas less than a year ago, it was a necessity. So I think this is where a lot of times we're seeing this disconnect between CEOs and between employees of, I was good enough to be trusted a year ago when you needed me to do it because it was critical to the business. But now all of a sudden, I'm supposed to only see it as a benefit again, and I'm feeling devalued in that transition. So I'd love to know, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I think it's happening all over the place. I think one of the challenges that companies face is that the pandemic has opened up Pandora's box around people's relationship to work. Oftentimes people say, now we're going back to work. No, we're not going back to work. We're going back to the workplace to work. We've been working hard this whole time. And that's just reality. I think it's raising some new issues that companies are going to have to grapple with, which is the whole issue of trust and accountability and the mindsets that people bring to this whole issue of hybrid working, because there are a number of leaders who basically have the belief that if you are out of sight, you're out of mind, and I can't monitor what you're doing, and therefore I don't trust you. And so I have to turn up the heat and bring you closer to me so I can visually get you anytime I want in order to work. And so there's a whole set of discussions that have to go on at the executive team about what is required of us as executives to make this hybrid working strategy work. And you put your finger on one of them. And the faster that executives can understand how this is a no normal, we're not going back to anything that we were at before. And we're not going to anything. It's basically a no normal, and we have to coexist in this no normal environment. And this is one of the issues that's come up. So really good question. And I think as you go through the presentation, you'll see that there's some ways of dealing with that.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Anything else right now? Okay. So the first thing we're going to talk about is grounded leadership. Now, grounded leadership is the foundation, and it enables you to create some roots about what it means to be grounded. And my slides have, come on, there we go. Okay, so grounded is the foundation, which helps leaders stay centered and resilient in the face of disruptive change. Now, this requires this game changer that I talked about between what you do defining who you are to flipping that on its head and basically say that who we are as human beings drives what we do. And this is a fundamental shift that has to go on inside organizations, that who you are drives what you do, which is typically competencies that companies have or behaviors that they want to see more of. And that leads to how you perform. So it's when you put this new paradigm in place, you suddenly see a world open up to you in terms of what capabilities can we teach and what are needed and how do cultures need to evolve to meet this new standard. In our work, we have noticed that there are 6 dimensions of health. Physical health is how you live. Emotional health is how you feel. Intellectual health is how you think. Social health is how you relate and connect to others and technology. Vocational health is how you perform. And spiritual health is how you live in the world. And each one of them is driven by one of those disruptors: speed, uncertainty, complexity, technology and connection, competition, and globalization. One other thing before this, and that is that this operates as an integrated system where you got to do a little bit of all these to stay fulfilled and happy and perform high, but nobody's going to get all of them right at any one point in time. When I write a book, my emotional health, I stop meditating, and my social health, my husband tells me that I become socially awkward because I'm so engaged in writing and the like. And my physical health, I go to the gym less. And so I have to re-energize myself. So physical health is about how aware are you of your body? How well do you manage energy? And are you living a peak performance lifestyle? I used to coach Dennis Nally and at PwC, and he did an amazing job at managing his physical health. And he said there's a triad on the stool: my work life, my personal life, and my family life. And I have to be able to do all 3 at once and keep that stool balanced. So how is your physical health? Secondly is emotional health, which is how you feel. How self-aware are you? Do you experience and express the full range of human emotions, but you course correct quickly into your positive emotions like hope, and generosity, and forgiveness, and compassion, and empathy, and yes, love? And then do you have the capacity to bounce back and to course correct and to embrace some adversity? I met Nando Parado some years ago. We were having lunch and he excused himself and went to the front of the room to give a talk, the luncheon talk. And he described himself. He was with a bunch of friends in South America in the Andes. They were flying over the Andes with his rugby team. The plane went down, his mother and sister died, and he spent 72 days up in the freezing cold weather. And today he runs 6 different companies, but he basically said that what we need to do is recognize that it's important to never stop changing, to live in the moment and to stay positive in life. And so the most effective leaders are really masters of emotional health. Intellectual health is how we think. It starts with deep curiosity, but something happens when we leave childhood and we stop being curious. It requires an adaptive mindset, a mindset that is always changing, and paradoxical thinking, which is really both and versus or thinking. And Jorgen actually was the CEO of Lego, and he really kick-started the company that was languishing in the marketplace. And the way he did it is he went to his core customer, which were children. And he watched them, hired an anthropologist, and saw how they were playing with blocks. They saw many options. They had multiple hypotheses with the blocks. It was trial and error. And he really changed his company into an intellectually healthy company, which was the source of 10 years of innovation. Social health is how we relate. It starts with being authentic, showing up as a real person. People are hungry to interact with real people. The relationships have to be win-win, mutually rewarding relationships and fair by definition. And then we have to be part of nurturing networks and communities. And Angela was the CEO of Burberry's, and she just retired as the SVP of Apple Retail. And she talks very openly about her spiritual meditation in the morning. And when she comes to work, the importance of a smile. We sometimes don't recognize that relationships are like social electricity. And we energize and de-energize people by the way we show up. And we actually communicate back and forth through mirror neurons in our brains. And so she really was a master and continues to be in social health. Vocational health is how we perform. One of the things we know is that people who have a meaningful calling in their work actually outperform, and companies who have a meaningful calling in the work, whether it's a pharmaceutical company or a hospital or even making a nuclear powered aircraft carrier, the more meaningful calling that we have, the better. Secondly is that vocationally healthy leaders are constantly learning, and they have a deep drive to succeed. And Indra is a great example of this. She grew up in a very middle-class family in India, came to the United States, went to Yale Business School, and worked as a secretary on the night shift. As she went through school, she started at PepsiCo and moved her way all the way up to CFO and then the chairman and CEO, and for a long time was the most powerful women CEO in the world. And she really seems to master this vocational health. Last one is spiritual health, which is how you view the world. It starts with a higher purpose. How are you connected to something bigger than yourself, and particularly the world? And it's my belief that the second element is the foundation of diversity and equity and inclusion. Do we see ourselves as equal human beings with different perspectives and backgrounds in life? And then finally, do you have a generosity of spirit? Do you carry around a sense of gratitude about what you have and what you don't have? And Paul is a CEO at Unilever who really had mastered this whole notion at Unilever and in his personal life. He's an avid advocate for the healthy environment and climate change. So there you have it, the 6 dimensions and the 18 roots of what it means to be grounded. Our research shows that, and we've done thousands of 360 assessments on being grounded and conscious. And we separated these groups into their high health scores and low health scores. And then we asked how these leaders were performing on some independent measures of leadership performance. As you can see, all the dimensions are associated with higher leadership performance. But the one dimension that was most predictive was our spiritual health, which surprised us when we first saw. But then in future consideration, we realized why it is do people have a higher purpose? Are they connected to something bigger than themselves? And do they have a generosity and a sense of gratitude about them? And that's what people want to work for and the like. And you may be religious or not. It doesn't matter. It's these principles that are really the most important. What we do is if we were in a workshop, we would spend some time diagnosing ourselves with 3 or 4 people in terms of what are the areas that we are good in, but particularly the areas that we need improvement. So why don't I stop there and just have a little conversation about this. And you might want to look at this chart and kind of an area that needs improvement and what's the impact that it has on you at life and work, and turn this into a little bit of a workshop here. Yeah.
Bob, I was going to say, one of the things that's available here also is the breakout room facility. So if you would like, I can set up breakout rooms and let them have a discussion among themselves for a few minutes and then come back and then share with everybody else what they got out of that discussion.
If you can do that, would be fine.
Okay, fine. So I'm going to set up some breakout rooms right now. I'm going to set up 4 breakout rooms. That way you won't have too many people in each room, but you'll have enough to have a small discussion. And the question here that Bob has is, which grounded dimension do you need the most improvement in? So that you're going to focus on that and then decide amongst yourselves after you wrap up who you would like to speak for your group, or maybe you can all individually share. Bob, how much time do you want to give them in the breakout room?
6 minutes.
6 minutes. 6 minutes is good. Okay, folks. So as soon as I hit create, you'll see a little note come up. Click on that note. That will put you in the breakout room. I'll send you a reminder when we're getting close to, let's say, the 2-minute mark. And then the last thing you'll see is a countdown that starts from 59 seconds and down. As soon as it reaches 0, that will bring you back here to the main deck. So I'm going to create those now, and you'll see the notes coming up, and you can just jump right in. And we're all back. All right. And of course, I'm really happy to see that Bob Rosen is back. So Bob, the floor is yours again.
Okay, great. Anybody want to take a shot at what they talked about?
I'm Julius Dixon, sales director with Barrington Ingelheim. And I had landed on the dimension that I thought I needed some help, but I was leaning toward and believe social health is an area of development. And simply because I've been detached because of the pandemic, locked in like many people, being cautious. In the last year, a lot of changes come to my life. I moved from Dallas, Texas. I now live in Smyrna, Georgia. So on a lot of levels, I need to reconnect with the community. And so I'm looking forward to doing that, but that's why I picked social health.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you all still see the slide in front of you with the heat map?
No, Bob, you have to reshare again. The slides are gone now.
Okay, hold on for a sec.
In the meantime, while Bob is setting that up, why don't you guys continue sharing? I heard another voice in the background, so go ahead.
And this is Nettie. I was paired with I was paired with Jen, and one of the things that we talked about was social connectivity or social health. So at least that was one of the things that we talked about. I shared that I was a bit more of an introvert and I hadn't really missed it as much. But the more we talked about it, I realized, yeah, I really do miss it, especially being Latina, where we're always hugging and kissing and everything in the Latino culture. I do miss that in terms of not having access to my family and some friends.
It seems from my experience that everybody is different on this heat map. And in fact, people are different at different points in time. And you got to really know yourself in terms of where you are. The other thing is that we have typically compartmentalized these areas of our health, but in fact, we live as a holistic human being. And there's a slow recognition that leadership and well-being are intimately connected. And the first job of a leader is to take care of herself. And we don't always put that at the top of our agenda. Frankly, sometimes it's the last thing on the agenda that goes, particularly if we've got kids or we've got other activities or whatever. And I know that clients have found that this heat map is interesting for family conversation. It's interesting to bring to your team and just to put up on your desk to remind yourself what's really important. We're going to move to the second one, which is conscious leadership. And conscious leadership is the accelerant. And this drives leaders to be more highly aware and adaptive to lead through change, a personal change map for people. And I'm talking about aware of yourself, aware of others, and aware of your environment. How many people think they're conscious? Anybody not think that? Most people do. Most people think that they are conscious human beings. The dilemma is that a lot of leaders think they're conscious, but only 60% of their employees rate their executives as conscious. And that is that people tend to see us in a more accurate way than we see ourselves, particularly people who are close to us that see us on a regular basis. So one of the problems is that conscious is in the eyes of the beholder, and we all have blind spots that get in our way. I'm reminded of the story of Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, when he suddenly introduced his digital solution and he said that he was to stop sending videos to people. And the marketplace was not ready for his decision. And they pushed back on him, and Wall Street pushed back on him, and he quickly apologized about the mistake. He corrected it, and he put his foot on their values-based culture. And he was somebody who was not only conscious of himself, but conscious of the relationships that he had with his stakeholders, as well as the relationships that he had with the environment and the various drivers in his environment. Contrast that with folks at Wells Fargo over the last several years. They got hit big time for providing incentives to employees to do things that were not really ethical in terms of buying new products, and was driven from the top. And they lost a ton of money. Their stock price fell through the I was going to say the roof, and my team always says that I'm not very good at these metaphors. Fell through the base into the basement, and their performance really dipped. And so there are two very different ways of thinking about being conscious. So let's talk a little bit about the 4 pitfalls that prevent conscious leadership. We've found in our research that there's a large number of people inside our institutions who are too stagnant. They're not moving fast enough. They're too shallow in their self-knowledge. They're too small in their perspective, locked in a set of mental models and of themselves and others that don't work. And they're too safe in facing challenges. And as we talk to successful leaders, we find that they exhibit 4 personal practices that underscore how they show up in life and at work. The first one is to get real, to embrace change. The second is to go deep and fully experience the change when it's happening. The third is to think big and expand your view of the change. And then lastly is to step up and energize yourself and others. So what I'd like to do is to go a little deep into each of these areas quickly, and then we can have a conversation. Getting real is about being real, but that requires that we change our relationship to change. We have to move from having a focus on stability to embracing the reality of uncertainty. That means facing the facts and really understanding the assumptions that we make in the world that are often faulty. And it also means getting comfortable being uncomfortable. All 3 of these are absolutely central. One of the things about changing your relationship to change is we have to make the shift from seeing change as happening to us to seeing change happening for us. And it's oftentimes hard to see the positive effects of change while we're going through it. Now, marriage is one thing, a wedding, but a lot of times change happens. And as someone once said, change in the middle of an institution oftentimes feels like failure. I was just on a call with a large Fortune 10 company, and basically they've got a new strategy, but the people in the belly of the organization don't understand it. and they haven't made the connection to it. So really changing our relationship to change is important. Going deep starts with understanding our threat response. The world of uncertainty involves a lot more threats, and we got to get better at responding to them. I talked about the leveraging of positive emotions. I love to use the example of Oprah Winfrey, who seems to bring positive emotions to every turn that she makes in her life and her work. Her history is really interesting as well. And then finally, identifying your thinking errors. Our mind can be a liberator or a slayer in terms of how we think. And when we magnify problems, or we catastrophize things, or we minimize our role in things, we're operating with thinking errors that we need to change and turn into liberators. One aspect of going deep is to understand your accelerators. We each have a set of accelerators. And if we were working in one of our longer workshops, you have an opportunity to pick 3 accelerators that drive you forward in a positive way. We also have hijackers, and we each have hijackers that stand in their way, and we're typically aware of them. And Michael Phelps is a great example. Lots of accelerators, his commitment, his desire to practice, his sense of excellence. But he was admitted into an institution, a health institution, primarily because he was overwhelmed by work. He was engaging in alcohol and drug abuse. And he came to realize that you might be able to be perfect in the pool, but you can't be perfect in life. And he learned to fall in love with a more holistic Michael Phelps. And we saw that in Rio. Thinking big is about looking over the horizon, almost being your own drone, if you will. Developing a Google mind. Imagine that your mind works similar to Google. It's constantly learning. It's constantly providing alternatives and options. And as Laszlo Bock, the old HR leader at Google, once said, that the most important skill is your capacity to learn. And then finally is leveraging your personal ecosystem, really understanding your own personal brand, and then building great networks in an ecosystem that really give you value in life and work. And then lastly is about stepping up. I wrote a book several years ago called Just Enough Anxiety, and made the distinction between too little anxiety, which is the face of complacency, and too much anxiety, which is the face of chaos. And just enough anxiety is what produces productive energy. And so the job of a leader is to know when to turn up or turn down the heat in an organization. And typically we do that by leading with constructive impatience. Angela Merkel is an expert at building constructive environments, but she's also a leader who has constructive impatience. She starts from the constructive side. Jeff Bezos starts with the impatient side, and he's got a long history of being impatient in terms of getting their organization to focus on customers. But the combination of being constructive and impatient at the same time, where 1 + 1 is 3, is really important when you're grappling with just enough anxiety and trying to translate that into your leadership behavior. And lastly is to build a shared consciousness. I was part of just seeing the Washington Nationals win the World Series, coming from last place to first place a couple years ago. And the players acted like family. The coach was a great collaborative leader, and they built an intense relationship with the community. And most winners of World Series do that as well. And they're building shared consciousness. And that has to happen inside institutions too. So in summary, moving from too shallow to going deep, too narrow to thinking big, too safe to getting real, and too small and stepping up. The research similarly, we divided groups into high and low self-awareness, and we rated them on how well they did on the various leadership performance indices at the bottom. And as you can see, the conscious leaders, the self-aware leaders outperformed in every single area. We also know that conscious leaders vastly improve the performance. When you ask a group, I did a poll with the Harris poll, and we found that 89% of employees agree that more conscious leaders would vastly improve their organization, not only in terms of the organizational effectiveness, but on financial performance as well. And then finally, I just want to share an example of one company that is grappling with this. And that this is a project we're working on at Cigna, where they've made a commitment to develop a grounded and conscious workforce from the very top down to the bottom of the organization and everything in between. And that gets done through executive facilitation at the top, certifying internal HR and OD staff to provide workshops, and then link it to technology support. And we've also created a pretty significant healthy leader portal where people can go in and support their learning when they're face-to-face or virtual instructor-led, or to do the learning individually on the internet. So let me just stop there and see if there are any questions or reactions to the material, and I welcome your thoughts on this.
So folks, again, two ways to pose your questions or your comments is either A, click to unmute yourself and go ahead and shout it out. The other is type something into the chat box and Bob will see it. And if he doesn't, I will, and I'll be your voice. So either way, those are two avenues that you have. You know, Bob, as I was listening to you talking about this, and I've talked to you a couple of times already on different interviews and sessions that we've had, what I found, a couple of things that I found fascinating about this are that all of those different dimensions that you spoke about when you had the slide up with the 4 different things that are going on that are important to organizations and how these things affect organization, diversity, equity, and inclusion being one, the other one being the constant disruption, hybrid workplaces. These things are all linked together, aren't they? They're all tied together in such a way that if you don't do one, you're not going to do the other one either. Is that a correct assumption?
It is a correct assumption, and I would even go out on a limb and say that most of the work that we're doing in the diversity, inclusion, and equity arena requires people to be grounded and conscious. And the reason that we haven't got as much sustainable behavior change as we've wanted is that it's generally lacking inside of people, because it is the foundation. Those 6 dimensions are the foundation of a good life and great leadership. And being conscious is the new smart. We all grew up in the paradigm that said that the goal was to be the smartest person in the room. Being smart is table stakes. You better be smart or you're not going to get hired. But then the question is, how do you excel? How do you differentiate yourself? And we believe that conscious is the new smart.
Yeah, I agree with you. And one more thing that occurred to me also as I was listening to you is that much of your experience and a lot of what you were sharing looks at the impact of this on company business leaders like CEOs or people who are reporting into those groups who have a financial or P&L responsibility. But all of these principles of those states of being emotionally, spiritually, and so forth, they're all important for all leaders, I would say. And I would say especially for people that are in the DEI space, whether they're the chief diversity officer who's in charge of the strategy and supporting the executive team with that strategy, or they are the leader of an employee resource group, whether it's the Women's Network or the Asian Network, because again, those are all different leadership roles that now are experiencing many of the things that you talked about before, like the fact that we have a hybrid workforce now presents some challenges in terms of how those people used to connect together, those groups, and some of the things that CDOs did in order to bring more inclusion to an organization. The same thing is true with the case of automation, which I'm very keen on, and the impact that's having on the workplace and how that affects DEI efforts. And also, of course, there is the awakening of many people who now look at DEI efforts, whether it be within a group or within the larger strategy of the organization, and they expect more. They're not expecting just that we check off boxes, that we did these things that look good. They expect to see actual results, and they probably expect them a lot quicker than they did in the past. So I would say that being a person who's a DEI leader, whether again at that strategy level or at that ERG level, there really is a big need to become a really healthy, centered leader. Because I like your analogy as you were talking about it. I think also when you're standing on ground that's moving a lot, you need to hold on to something. And in this case, that something is yourself and your values, and having that clarity of these basic things that make you who you are. So I really love that about how all of this sort of links with all those other pieces. Bob?
I was just going to say that in roles like DEI roles, it's important that we experience the issues deeply, but then we have to become participative observers of ourselves and our teams as we teach and role model and champion this work. And so you can't let your own personal biases or assumptions or prejudices, for that much, or blind spots influence how you show up. And so it puts a lot of pressure on us. I feel the pressure all the time to show up as a healthy leader, a healthy person, to be honest and authentic. And you go down the list, and sometimes it can be exhausting, but I think it's really important for leaders to recognize that they're always on show, and it's a lot easier to be on show when you're authentic and you're not being blindsided by your own biases or blind spots.
Yeah, absolutely. You can only take people as far as you've gone. So if you want to elevate other people's thinking, their inclusivity, their equity, you constantly have to be working on your own, because we're not perfect either. So we constantly have to be developing ourselves so that we can then lead the way. So Bob, here's what I'm going to do, because you're generously giving us this time to have this discussion with you. I am going to do a little thing that I do in a lot of programs that I facilitate, which is when I don't get a lot of people who volunteer, I volunteer them. So I'm going to jump around a little bit and call some people and say, hey, what did you get out of this? And what are some of your thoughts? Jen, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself? You had posed the question before. I'd love to hear what you got out of this. And right after Jen, maybe Joe and Christian. Go ahead.
Thanks. No, I just want to say, Bob and Joseph, thank you again for another great session. I think for me, when we had that breakout conversation and sharing some of my own feelings as we're going through this transition of going back to the workplace, and I love what you said, it's not going back to work, it's going back to the workplace, right? And it's that moment of self-reflection. And as you put up that heat map in those different categories, it's recognizing where I'm feeling some of those changes. And I know if I'm feeling it, our leaders have to be feeling it, other employees have to be feeling it. So it was that recognition. So thanks for bringing that to the forefront of the conversation today.
That's great, Jen. Thank you. Thank you. Joe, why don't you go ahead?
Similar to Kristen's, when we did the breakout group, definitely saw that there was a lot of, similarities just among our group. 3 people. And then just one of the visuals that you had that showed the percentage that the employee actually sees versus what you think, it kind of opens your eyes to realize that you've really got to go out and do it more. So just to try to get that perception up to what reality is. So it was a great session. Really enjoyed it. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, and in that same vein, exactly what Joe said, because we were in the same group together and we all just resonated with the pandemic driven need for social interaction, but yet also being relieved that all of us are introverts. So the pandemic having that social cut was great in some aspects, but now that we're getting back to it, we're having to reacquaint ourselves with, okay, now I actually have to, interact with people and that kind of thing. The only other thing that was really resonating to me is that people are rejecting the idea and starting to instead embrace who I am as a human being should define what I do rather than what I do defines me. So I just think that's really cool. That was very resonating with me personally anyway.
Excellent. Thanks, Christian. Appreciate that. And finally, you know what? Just to bring us home, I think we got a little more time before Bob has to jump off. Nettie, why don't you unmute yourself, and love to hear your quick thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, no, I'm aligned with all of the comments that were shared. I have to admit, I've been working with our wellness group a little bit on some of the things that we're rolling out, but this adds a whole new dimension of conversation. And in the back room, I was sending my Jen McMillian, a note saying, hey, I'd love to bring this conversation into the work environment. I don't feel personally as proficient to be able to facilitate it, but I love the way you guys facilitated this discussion, because I feel like there's this hunger and need to have a deeper conversation, but also a gap in the skill sets that some of our managers and leaders may have in order to really be able to engage in deeper discussions. And I feel that there's something here we should really be looking to explore. So I'd love to pursue a conversation after this meeting about how we could bring this into our organization.
Fantastic.
Yes, I just was going to say that the way we do that, and thanks for the question, is that we offer programs in those 5 areas: grounded, conscious, healthy teams, healthy change, and healthy culture. And we offer them through face-to-face learning, through virtual instructor-led. Typically, they're 9 sessions over whatever period of time, and they work on the portal in between. And then a self-paced program to scale in each of these areas. Welcome any interest on that.
Fantastic. All right, Bob, I know you have to go. Thank you for the wonderful session. I think it was very insightful and eye-opening in a number of areas. And I've had this conversation with you a couple of times, but I always feel like I learned something new. I got a lot out of it as well. So thank you for that, Bob. So very quickly for everybody else, we're 2 workshops down and 5 to go. Our next program will take place tomorrow, Thursday, July 15th. It's going to run from 12 noon EST to 1:30 p.m. EST, the same as this program. And our workshop leader for this is going to be me. Our topic is getting middle management's passionate support. And in this program, what I'm going to give you is a peek into what happens inside your manager's brain and why they may appear not to support your ERG, BRG efforts. And I'm also going to show you how you can get past those barriers and actually turn that manager into your raving fan. So tune in for that. I look forward to seeing you back. As always, today's program has been recorded. It will become available to you and members who could not join us today within a few business days. So thank you again all for joining us, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care.